Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? I am indeed Michael Costello from Bird Rock. Next slide, please. The Wall Street Journal and the Los Angeles Times reported that the greatest economic return on residential property is from the short-term vacation rental. Next slide, please. The statistics vary on this a little bit. It depends on when you take the Times. The Wall Street Journal also reported that the growth rate of the short-term vacation rental industry is 10% per annum. And that, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, is the economic driving engine that is converting residential property into mini hotels. Next slide, please. I'd like to show you what's happening on my particular block. As depicted here in 2002, the owner-occupied residences are depicted in green. The traditional rental, long-term rental properties are depicted in blue. Next slide, please. Here we are in 2008. The short-term vacation rental properties depicted in red, and those were some of the worst in La Jolla. Next slide, please. What does it look like currently? 2018, we have 11 short-term vacation rentals on my block of 52 homes. This is a cancer. It is decimating the neighborhoods and the quality of life and what residential property is in our town. This is my block. There are other communities all over San Diego experiencing the same decimation. This decimation is very similar to what's happening in other places. Next slide, please. Here we have what happens to Tokyo periodically. Without any regard to the need for residences or the quality of life, Godzilla comes along and just tears the place apart. No regard for the residents. Next slide, please. Some of you say compromise. Next slide, please. What is a compromise? Compromise, the noun. Settlement of differences by arbitration, by consent reached by mutual concessions, or the verb, to bind by mutual agreement, to adjust or settle by mutual concessions, to come to agreement by mutual concessions, mutual agreements, concessions. Next slide, please. Okay, concessions by homeowners, the residents. Loss of quality of life, noise from jacuzzis, noise from swimming pools, loss of affordable housing, higher home prices. Well, you know this list. It goes on, and you know it's legitimate. Did we agree to this as homeowners? No, we did not. Next slide, please. Concessions by Godzilla, a.k.a. the industry, perhaps enforcement, by officers paid for by fees from the industry? Really? Historically, we know that just can't work. Perhaps monitoring. By whom? These aren't concessions at all. Next slide, please. Enforcement. Enforcement could be by the same department that enforces ordinances such as the dog poop ordinance and the leaf blower ordinance. Are these ordinances enforced? Did you even know there are such ordinances? What do they say? That's what we thought. That's the same intention in placing an ordinance on Godzilla. Next slide, please. And that puts a real smile on her face. Next slide, please. What's the rest of the definition of compromise? The noun. A concession to something derogatory or prejudicial, as in compromise of principles. Verb, to make a shameful or disreputable concession. No one will ever say that about me. Will they ever say it about you? Next slide, please. You want to give Godzilla all. What about your duty to the residents and homeowners? You want to compromise our needs for housing and quality of life. Our complaints about mini hotels are legitimate, yet you turn your backs on us for a one-sided giveaway to Godzilla. What could possibly be your motivation? Next slide, please. Godzilla really stands up for that one. Next slide, please. Okay, but really, what's the worst that could possibly happen at a short-term vacation rental? Well, the worst did happen. It isn't theory. Next slide. Oh, no, forgive me, stay there. At the La Jolla Town Council meeting a couple years ago, I asked Jonah Mechanic if he had ever rented a short-term vacation rental where a child had died in a pool. He replied that it's inappropriate to discuss it. I replied, inappropriate is a child dead in a swimming pool. Inappropriate is this child stone cold dead in a coroner's office instead of in the loving arms of its family. Appropriate would be for that family to have gone to a conventional hotel that would have had a fence around the pool, and that child would be alive today. And you're going to hear more from these people. We thought that would be the end of it. The city, the council, the mayor would do something about this problem. But nothing happened. Next slide, please. It is a failure of city government not to enforce long-standing zoning laws. Next slide, please. Our zoning laws are fair. No one is left out. We have residential zones and we have commercial zones. Next slide, please. All you need to do is enforce the current municipal code. And you know, we bought our houses understanding that would protect our residential zones and our houses. Current municipal code, that renting for less than 30 days in a single-family residential zone is not permitted. Since it is a long-standing municipal code, the Coastal Commission need not be involved. Pardon me. Next slide, please. Compromise, noun, a concession to something derogatory or prejudicial, as in compromise of principles. Verb, to make a shameful or disreputable concession. I hope that's not your legacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker